The only thing louder than the storm was the sound of the wolf dying. Dr. Alara Vance slammed the door of her pickup truck, the wind snatching the sound and throwing it into the snarling pines. Rain lashed her face, cold as needles. She clutched her emergency kit to her chest and ran, her boots sinking into the mud of the Forest Service road. Up ahead, the frantic beams of 2 flashlights cut through the downpour, illuminating a scene that made her professional composure crack. 2 park rangers, silhouetted against their truck's headlights, stood over a massive, dark shape. It was a wolf, or what was left of one. He was colossal, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen. His fur matted with rain, mud, and something darker blood. A vicious, steel-jawed trap, rusted and brutal, was clamped shut on his hind leg, biting deep to the bone. But it was the stillness of him that was most alarming. "Doc, over here!" Ranger Evans waved her over, his face grim. "We tried to get it off, but the mechanism is seized. He's not fighting anymore." Alara dropped to her knees in the muck, ignoring the cold seeping through her jeans. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled as she reached out. The wolf didn't growl. He didn't even flinch. His head was down, his breathing a shallow, ragged whisper. And then he turned his head slightly, and her breath hitched. His eyes, they were clouded over, a milky, opaque white, blind. This magnificent creature had been stumbling through the wilderness, trapped, starving, and completely sightless. A wave of profound, aching pity washed over her, so strong it felt like a physical blow. "He's blind," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We think that's how he got caught." The other ranger, Jessup said, didn't see it. "He's been like this for who knows how long." Standard procedure was clear. An animal this injured, this dangerous, was often put down. A blind apex predator couldn't be released back into the wild. It was a death sentence either way, but as Alara looked into those unseeing eyes, she saw a flicker of something not aggression, but a deep, resigned intelligence. A silent dignity in the face of his own end. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't. "We need to get this trap off him. Now," she said, her voice firming with resolve. "Evans, I need the heavy-duty bolt cutters from my truck. Jessup, get the sedative ready, the strong one." As they scrambled, Alara worked quickly. She prepared a syringe, her movements efficient despite the pounding rain. She murmured soft, nonsensical words, the same soothing tone she used with all her frightened patients. "It's all right, big guy. Just a little pinch. Then the pain stops. I promise." She injected the sedative into his thick ruff. The wolf let out a low, pained whine, a sound that tore at her soul. For a moment, his head lifted, and those blind eyes seemed to look right through her. Then, the drugs took hold, and his massive body went limp. The real fight began. It took all 3 of them, muscles straining, to pry the rusted jaws of the trap apart. The metal screamed in protest. When the leg came free, it was a mess of torn flesh and shattered bone. Alara worked fast, staunching the bleeding with gauze and pressure bandages, her mind already racing through the surgery he would need. "I'll take him from here," she said, wiping a muddy hand across her forehead. Evans looked at her, stunned. "Alara, be reasonable. The state facility is 2 hours away. We can transport him." "No," she interrupted. "He comes with me. My home clinic has everything I need. He needs constant care, and I can't do that from a distance." She saw the protest forming on his lips. "He's blind, Mark. He'll be euthanized. I'm not letting that happen after all this." It was an emotional argument, not a logical one, but Evans knew her. He'd seen her nurse baby birds with broken wings and orphaned foxes back to health. He saw the fierce determination in her eyes and finally nodded. "Your funeral, Doc. Just be careful. That's no ordinary wolf." They managed to heave the unconscious giant onto a stretcher and into the back of her modified truck. The drive home was a tense, slow crawl through the storm. Every bump in the road made her wince, glancing in the rearview mirror at the still form. Her home was a repurposed ranger station on the edge of the vast state park, isolated, but perfect for her work. The attached clinic was small but well-equipped. It took every ounce of her strength to get him onto the stainless steel table in her surgical bay. For the next 4 hours, she lost herself in the work. She cleaned the wound, removing debris and dead tissue. She set the broken bones, pinning them where necessary. She sutured muscle and skin, her hands moving with a precise, practiced grace. Throughout it all, she kept talking to him. "You're a fighter, aren't you? Such a strong heart. You're going to make it. I'm not giving up on you." As she finished bandaging the leg, Her eyes drifted back to his face. Even unconscious, there was a regal quality to him. The broad forehead, the strong jaw, and those clouded eyes. Who was he? Where had he come from? This was no scrawny, scavenging wolf. This was a king, fallen from grace. Finally, she was done. She moved him to a large, padded recovery enclosure in the corner of the clinic, lining it with clean blankets. She hooked him up to an IV for fluids and antibiotics. Exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. She sank into a chair beside the enclosure, just watching the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. The storm outside had begun to subside, leaving behind a steady, gentle rain. In the quiet, a strange sense of peace settled over the room. This was a terrible idea. He was a wild, dangerous animal, but as she looked at him, all she felt was a fierce, protective urge. She reached through the bars of the enclosure and gently rested her fingers on his massive head, between his ears. His fur was surprisingly soft. "You're safe now," she whispered into the quiet. "You're home." It was a promise she had no idea she would have to die to keep. The first thing the wolf did was try to kill her. Elara woke to a guttural snarl that vibrated in her very bones. She'd fallen asleep in the chair, her neck stiff, a blanket pulled at her feet. In the enclosure, the wolf was awake, and he was fury incarnate. He'd ripped the IV from his leg. Blood speckled the clean bandages. Despite his injuries, he was on his feet, swaying but formidable. His lips peeled back from teeth that looked like shards of ivory. His clouded eyes were wide with panic and disorientation, his head swinging blindly, tracking her by sound and scent. The snarl that ripped from his throat was a promise of evisceration. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the reality she had ignored in her pity. This was the wild animal. "Easy," she said, her voice low and steady, belying her terror. "Easy now. You're safe." He lunged. It was a clumsy, pain-filled movement, but it carried all his considerable weight. He slammed into the heavy-gauge steel bars of the enclosure. The entire structure shook. The sound was deafening, a clang of metal that echoed through the clinic. He bounced back, stumbled over his bad leg, and let out a sharp yelp of pain. But the pain only fueled his rage. He gathered himself for another charge. This wasn't working. Fear would get her killed. She had to be his doctor, not his victim. She didn't retreat. Instead, she took a single step forward, her posture straight, her voice dropping into a firm, no-nonsense tone she used for combative stallions. "That's enough." The authority in her voice gave him pause, his head cocked, ears swiveling. "You are injured. I'm trying to help you. Your leg is broken. You are dehydrated. And you are blind." She said the last word with deliberate bluntness, forcing the truth into the space between them. "Fighting me will only cause you more pain. I will not hurt you." He stood, panting, a low, continuous rumble still emanating from his chest. But he didn't charge again. She could see the conflict in his tense muscles, the instinct to fight warring with the dawning understanding that he was trapped, vulnerable, and in agony. Slowly, never taking her eyes off him, she knelt and gathered the IV line. "I need to put this back in. You need the fluids. It will help the pain." It took an hour. An hour of her moving with glacial slowness, speaking in a continuous, calm monotone, explaining every single action before she did it. She didn't use baby talk. She spoke to him as if he could understand every word. "I'm going to open the enclosure now. I am coming inside. I have the IV line in my hand." His growl intensified as the latch clicked open. She stepped inside. The space suddenly felt impossibly small. He could crush her skull with a single bite. His scent filled her nostrils, wild musk, blood, and the clean smell of the antiseptic she'd used. He didn't attack. He tracked her every movement with his head, his blind eyes wide. She could see him listening, his entire world reduced to the sound of her voice and the scent of her skin. She managed to reinsert the catheter and secure it with tape. He flinched but allowed it. It was a monumental victory. When she finished and stepped back out, locking the door, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage the latch. She leaned against the bars, spent. The wolf slowly settled back onto the blankets, his gaze, sightless but piercing, still fixed on her. The growling had stopped. This was how their routine began. For days, it was a battle of wills, measured in inches and decibels. He would tolerate her medical care, but any unexpected sound or movement would send him into a defensive panic. He refused to eat the raw meat she offered. His pride was a fortress, and starvation was his weapon of choice. The turning point came on the third day. His strength was fading. He was listless, his breathing shallow. Desperation clawed at Alara. She had an idea. It was risky, borderline insane. She took a piece of raw venison, and instead of placing it in his bowl, she slowly, deliberately, stepped back inside the enclosure. She sat down, cross-legged, just inside the door. She placed the meat on the floor between them. "You need to eat," she said, her voice soft. "I'm not leaving until you do." He ignored her. An hour passed. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the medical fridge and the sound of their breathing. Her legs fell asleep. Still, she sat. Finally, driven by a hunger stronger than his pride, he stirred. He dragged himself up and crept forward, his movements hesitant. He stopped a foot from the meat, his head lifted, sniffing the air between them. He was sniffing her, memorizing her scent. It was the most direct, intentional contact he had initiated. Then, he took the meat. He didn't gobble it. He took it delicately from the floor, his muzzle brushing her knee. The contact was electric. A jolt shot up her leg. He retreated to the far corner to eat it. It was a surrender, not to captivity, but to her. From that moment, everything changed. He started eating from a bowl, but only if she was the one who placed it there. He allowed her to change his bandages without a growl. She began to read her veterinary journals aloud to him, her voice filling the quiet clinic. She told him about her day, her frustrations, her small triumphs. He became her silent, four-legged confidant. One afternoon, she was cleaning his wound. The gash was healing well, the skin knitting together with healthy pink tissue. Her fingers, gentle and sure, probed the area around the scar. And then she found it. Something wrong. Beneath the skin of his shoulder, near his spine, was a hard, foreign object. It wasn't a bone fragment. It was smooth and long, like a sliver of stone or metal. As her fingers traced its outline, the wolf, her stoic, unflinching patient, let out a whimper. It wasn't a sound of physical pain. It was a sound of profound, soul-deep distress. He flinched away from her touch for the first time in days. She withdrew her hand, stunned. "What was that?" she murmured. "What did they do to you?" This was no ordinary injury. This was something placed there, deliberately. That night, she dreamed of running through a dark forest, of the feel of cold steel against her skin, of a pair of golden eyes watching her from the shadows. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, the memory of those eyes burning in her mind. The next morning, she went to the enclosure with a new, grim determination. The wolf was waiting for her. He was sitting up, his head held high. As she approached, he did something he had never done before. He turned his head and deliberately presented his injured shoulder to her, the one with the hidden object. It was an invitation, a plea. He knew she had found his secret, and he was asking for her help. The battle for his body was over. The war for his truth was about to begin. The trust between them was now a tangible thing, forged in the silent language of scars and the unspoken secrets buried deep within his flesh. The outside world was about to crash into their fragile sanctuary, and it started with a sleek, black car rolling to a silent stop outside her gate. The wolf's growl was a low, rolling thunder that Alara felt in her teeth. It was a sound she had never heard from him before. Not the panicked snarl of a trapped animal, not the pained whimper of a suffering patient. This was a pure, undiluted warning, a promise of violence. She was changing his water bowl when it started. One moment, he was resting peacefully, his head on his paws. The next, his entire body went rigid, his head snapped up, his milky eyes wide and staring at nothing and everything. The fur along his spine bristled, making him look twice his already massive size. "What is it?" she whispered, her own senses snapping to alert. The growl intensified, vibrating through the floorboards. He was staring directly through the clinic's window, towards the long, winding gravel driveway that led to her isolated property. A moment later, she heard it too. The crunch of tires on gravel. Not the familiar rumble of Ranger Evans's truck, but the smooth, expensive purr of a well-tuned engine. Her blood ran cold. The man from the woods. Cale. The name Fenris had spoken in her dream flashed in her mind. A ghost of a premonition. It couldn't be. It was just a dream. Heart hammering, she crept to the window and peered through the blinds. A car, long and black and sleek as a panther, was idling just outside her front gate. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored coat that seemed to absorb the afternoon light. His hair was the color of polished jet, and his features were sharp, handsome in a way that was cold and utterly devoid of warmth. He didn't look like a government official or a curious local. He looked like death on a paid holiday. He stood at the gate, not opening it, just observing. His gaze swept over her cabin, her clinic, the overgrown garden, missing nothing. It was the assessing, predatory stare of a man calculating the weakest point of entry. Behind her, the wolf's growl escalated into a series of sharp, explosive barks. He was throwing himself against the bars of the enclosure now, a frenzy of fang and fury. The stainless steel frame groaned in protest. The sound was terrifying, deafening. He knows him, Ilara realized with a sickening jolt. He knows his scent. The man at the gate heard the commotion. A slow, thin smile spread across his face. It was the most frightening thing she had seen all week. She had a choice. Lock the doors, call the rangers, and hope he went away. Or confront him. Show him she wasn't a victim hiding in her home. Grabbing the heavy, forged iron fireplace poker leaning by the door, she stepped outside, pulling the clinic door firmly shut behind her. The barks and snarls were muffled but no less ferocious. The sound followed her like a shield. The man's smile didn't falter as she approached the gate. His eyes, a flat, chilly gray, swept over her, from her messy ponytail to her worn work boots, lingering for a moment on the poker in her hand. He looked amused. "Can I help you?" Ilara's voice was tighter than she wanted it to be. "I certainly hope so," the man replied. His voice was smooth, cultured, but it had a subtle, grating edge, like sandpaper under silk. "My name is Kale. I'm with the Northern Conservation Initiative. We track and protect rare canine populations. We received a report of a large, non-native wolf species being brought to this location. I'm here to take it into protective custody." Every alarm bell in Ilara's head was screaming. His story was too pat, his demeanor all wrong. He didn't look like a conservationist. He looked like an undertaker. "There's no wolf here," she said, layering her voice with a bored finality. "I'm a wildlife vet. I have a few recovering raccoons and a fox with a broken leg. Nothing that would interest your initiative." Kale's gaze drifted past her, to the clinic door, where the sounds of the wolf's rage were still clearly audible. The smile on his face widened a fraction. "It seems one of your raccoons has a formidable set of lungs." Ilara didn't flinch. "That's a German shepherd. Aggressive. Rabies scare. I'm quarantining him. It's not safe for visitors." For a long moment, Kyle just stared at her, his gray eyes seeming to peel back her layers, searching for the lie. The silence was heavier than the wolf's growls. Inside the clinic, the frenzy suddenly stopped. An abrupt, utter silence fell. It was somehow more menacing than the noise. Kale's smile finally vanished. The mask of civility dropped, and what was beneath was pure, unadulterated menace. "Let's stop playing games, Doctor," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried perfectly in the still air. "You have something that doesn't belong to you, a dangerous, defective creature. You are a sentimental human who saw a wounded puppy. You have no idea what you are meddling with. That thing in there is a liability. It is broken. It needs to be put down for the good of its own kind. Defective. Broken." The words were chosen to wound, to devalue the creature she had fought so hard to save. "I think you should leave," Ilara said, her knuckles white on the poker. "Now, this is private property." Kale took a single step closer to the gate, close enough that she could smell a faint, strange scent on him like ozone and cold stone. "He is blind, is he not? A king who cannot see his own kingdom is no king at all. He is a placeholder, a stain, and his continued existence is an insult. When we take him, and we will, his suffering will be profound, and it will be on your hands for delaying the inevitable." The direct reference to his blindness was a confirmation. This was no random bureaucrat. This was the wolf's enemy. This was the man who had set the trap. "Get off my land," she snarled, her fear burning away into something hot and fierce. She raised the poker, leveling it at his chest through the bars of the gate. Kyle looked at the iron rod as if it were a twig. He gave a soft, condescending chuckle. "As you wish, Doctor. We'll play this your way for now. But night is coming, and I find that so many unfortunate accidents happen in the dark." He turned, without another word, and slid back into the black car. The engine purred to life, and the vehicle rolled back down the driveway, disappearing into the tree line. Alara didn't move until the sound of the engine had completely faded. Her entire body was trembling. She lowered the poker, her arm aching with tension. She turned and ran back into the clinic. The wolf was pressed against the bars of his enclosure, his body still taut as a bowstring. He was panting, his tongue lolling, but he was silent. As she entered, he turned his head toward her, and in those sightless eyes, she didn't see panic. She saw a grim, cold understanding. He knew who had been here. He knew what it meant. Their sanctuary was breached. The hunt was on. She walked to the enclosure, her legs weak, and sank to her knees in front of it. She reached through the bars, and this time, she didn't just touch his head. She cupped his massive jaw, her small hand against the coarse fur of his cheek. "I won't let him take you," she vowed, her voice raw with emotion. "Do you hear me? I won't." The wolf leaned into her touch, a slow, deliberate pressure. He let out a soft, shuddering sigh, his hot breath ghosting across her skin. It was an acceptance. A pact. The war was no longer a specter in a nightmare. It was a man in a black car, and he would be back. The silence after Kale's departure was a physical weight, thick and suffocating. The wolf didn't move from the bars, his body a statue of coiled tension. Elara's mind raced, a frantic checklist of panic. Board the windows, reinforce the doors, get the rifle from the attic, call Evans. But a deeper, more primal instinct told her it was useless. Kale wasn't a burglar to be kept out by locks and lumber. He was a force of nature, and he would flow through any crack she left open. Her eyes fell on the wolf. His silence was more unnerving than his earlier fury. It was the quiet of a soldier awaiting orders. "He called you a king," she whispered, her voice cracking in the stillness. The wolf's ear twitched. He turned his massive head, his milky eyes seeming to search for her. The memory of the object buried in his shoulder, the one that had caused him such deep distress, flared in her mind. Kael's words echoed. A king who cannot see his own kingdom. A placeholder. A stain. This wasn't just about killing a rival. This was about erasing a legacy. He was talking about this, wasn't he? She said, her gaze fixed on his shoulder. The thing inside you. That's what this is about. She stood up, her decision made. The medical mystery was now a matter of survival. She had to know what they were fighting for. "I need to see it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She moved to her surgical tray, selecting a scalpel, antiseptic, and a pair of fine-tipped forceps. Her hands were steady now, the doctor in her taking over from the terrified woman. When she approached the enclosure, the wolf didn't growl. He didn't back away. He watched her, his head tilted, as if listening to the grim resolution in her heartbeat. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. "This will hurt," she warned, her voice soft but firm. "I'm sorry." She cleaned the area over the hidden object with a swab of antiseptic. His skin flinched, but he held his ground. Taking a deep breath, she made a small, precise incision. A bead of dark blood welled up. He let out a sharp, pained huff, his muscles quivering, but he did not move. She worked quickly, the forceps probing the shallow cut. And then her instruments touched it. Not stone, not shrapnel, metal. Smooth, cool, and intricately shaped. She grasped it and, with a gentle but firm pull, extracted it from his flesh. She held it in her palm, wiping the blood away with a gauze pad. It was a sigil, forged from a metal that seemed both silver and obsidian. It was about the size of her thumb. It was in the shape of a stylized, howling wolf, its head thrown back, its body a fluid curve of powerful muscle. But it was the details that stole her breath. The craftsmanship was exquisite, ancient, and utterly alien. It was no tribal trinket. It was a heraldic symbol, a royal seal. "My God," she breathed. This was no mere animal. The proof was cool and heavy in her hand. Kale hadn't been speaking in metaphors. He was a king, a shifter prince. And this sigil was his mark. As the last of the blood was wiped from the metal, the sigil began to emit a faint, thrumming hum. A soft, ethereal light, the color of moonlight, pulsed from within it. The wolf reacted instantly. He jerked his head up, a low, wondering whine escaping his throat. He took a step toward her, his nose twitching, not at her, but at the object in her hand. "It's yours, isn't it?" she said, holding it out to him. "They put this in you, to track you, to hurt you?" He didn't sniff the sigil. Instead, he nudged her hand with his nose, pushing it gently back toward her. Then he bowed his head. The meaning was unmistakable. You keep it. The gesture was one of immense, staggering trust. He was giving her his identity, his crown. A sudden, sharp crackle made her jump. The old radio on her clinic counter, tuned to a static-ridden local station, suddenly spat to life. Unprecedented celestial event. A news broadcaster's voice fizzed through the speakers. The blood moon eclipse, the first in over a century, is expected to reach its peak tomorrow night at 11:47 p.m. Astronomers are calling it The wolf's head snapped toward the radio. A tremor went through his entire body, a vibration of raw, unleashed power. The air in the clinic grew thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on Ilara's arms stand on end. The sigil in her hand grew warmer, its pulse quickening, beating in time with the frantic rhythm of her own heart. He wasn't just listening. He was recognizing it. He turned back to her, and for a single, heart-stopping second, she thought she saw a flicker of gold deep within the milky white of his eyes. A flash of the king trapped within the beast. The pieces slammed together in her mind. The trap, the sigil, the eclipse. Kale's desperate urgency. This wasn't a random persecution. It was a race against a celestial clock. The eclipse, she whispered, her blood running cold. That's the deadline, isn't it? He has to kill you before it happens. The wolf let out a soft, definitive chuff. Yes, the stakes had just been catapulted into the stratosphere. This wasn't just about protecting a wounded animal anymore. It was about safeguarding a monarch on the eve of his coronation. It was about ensuring a king could reclaim his throne. Kale would be back. Not tomorrow. Tonight. The darkness he promised was already gathering. Ilara closed her fingers tightly around the sigil. The metal was no longer cool. It was warm, almost alive, its pulse a steady, reassuring rhythm against her palm. It felt like a key. It felt like a weapon. She looked at the magnificent, blind creature before her, who had just entrusted her with his very soul. Okay, she said, her voice low and fierce. Then we get ready for them. The clinic was no longer a sanctuary. It was a fortress, and she was its warden. The sigil in Ilara's pocket was a live coal, its heat a constant, pulsing reminder of the countdown ticking down in the heavens. She worked with a frantic, focused energy, the kind born of pure survival instinct. She dragged heavy oak cabinets in front of the clinic's windows, their glass panes suddenly feeling as fragile as tissue paper. She bolted the front door with a heavy steel crossbar she'd salvaged from a barn demolition years ago. Every thud and scrape of furniture was a drumbeat marching toward the inevitable. The wolf paced. He was a shadow of contained lightning, moving from one end of his enclosure to the other, his head low, his ears swiveling, cataloging every sound she made, and 1,000 she couldn't hear. He was no longer a patient. He was a general assessing his battlefield. As the sun dipped below the tree line, plunging the world into a deep, premature twilight, a new sound joined the symphony of her preparations. A low, mournful howl, lifted from somewhere deep in the surrounding woods. It was answered by another, closer this time, from the opposite direction. Then, a third. They were here. Ilara froze, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She looked at the wolf. He had stopped pacing. He stood at the center of his enclosure, facing the barricaded door, utterly still. The low, rolling thunder of a growl began in his chest, a sound that promised a storm of teeth and vengeance. They're surrounding the house, she realized, her blood turning to ice water. This wasn't an assault. It was a encirclement. She grabbed the old hunting rifle from its rack, her hands slick with sweat. She'd never shot at anything more than a paper target. The weight of it felt alien and sinister in her hands. The first impact came without warning. It wasn't at the door. It was a shattering crash from the rear of the clinic, the small window in the utility room. A dark, furred shape, lean and powerful, was already halfway through the broken glass, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. Ilara spun, raising the rifle. But her movements were too slow, clumsy with fear. The wolf moved. He didn't charge the bars. He didn't snarl. With the explosive burst of power that made the enclosure shudder, he launched himself up, his massive forepaws hooked onto the top of the 8-foot-high steel frame. His muscles bunched, and with a grunt of effort, he hauled his entire body up and over, clearing the barrier with a grace that defied his size and his injuries. He landed on the clinic floor with a soft thud, silent as a ghost. Ilara could only stare, her jaw slack. He had never tried to escape. The enclosure had never been a prison he couldn't break. It had been a choice, a promise to her. The invading wolf, Kale's scout, dropped into a crouch, its lips peeling back in a silent snarl. Her wolf responded not with a sound, but with action. He crossed the distance in 2 bounds. There was no prolonged fight, no dramatic struggle. It was an execution. Her wolf's head snaked forward, his jaws closing on the other's neck with a sickening crack. The scout collapsed, dead before it hit the floor. He stood over the body, his chest heaving, his blind eyes fixed on nothing. Blood dripped from his muzzle. The message was clear. This is my domain. The brief, brutal victory was a spark, not a quenching. It ignited the powder keg. The world outside exploded. Howls, snarls, and the sound of heavy bodies throwing themselves against the walls filled the air. The front door shuddered under a massive impact. The barricaded windows groaned. They were coming from all sides now. A coordinated, frenzied assault. Alara backed into the center of the room, the rifle gripped white-knuckled in her hands. The wolf positioned himself in front of her, a living, breathing bulwark, turning in a slow circle, his head cocked as he tracked the multiple threats. The front door splintered. The crossbar held, but the wood around the lock exploded inward. Through the jagged hole, a pair of cold, gray eyes met hers. Kale. He smiled, a flash of white teeth in the darkness. Time's up, Doctor. He began to change, his form blurred, his body contorting, clothes tearing as dark, coarse fur sprouted from his skin. He was larger than the scout, more powerful, his presence a wave of pure malice. Her wolf didn't wait. He charged the door, hitting the shattered wood with the force of a battering ram. The remains of the door burst outward, and the 2 titans, one dark as sin, the other a lighter, noble gray, crashed together in a whirlwind of fang and claw on her front porch. It was a nightmare given form. The sounds were not of animals fighting, but of giants tearing the world apart. Snarls ripped the air. Alara heard the wet, tearing sound of flesh, and a pained yelp that she knew, with soul-crushing certainty, came from her wolf. He was still injured. He was still blind. She couldn't just watch. Raising the rifle, she ran to the doorway. The 2 massive wolves were a tangled, roaring mass. She couldn't get a clear shot. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony. Kale gained the upper hand, pinning her wolf, his jaws seeking his throat. In that moment, Alara saw not a beast, but the man from her dream, the prince. And he was about to die. Acting on pure instinct, she threw the rifle aside. It was useless. Her fingers closed around the object in her pocket, the sigil. It was burning hot now, almost too hot to hold. As Kale's jaws descended, she pulled the sigil out and screamed, "Leave him alone." She didn't know what she expected. A magic blast? A shield of light? What happened was subtler and far more profound. The sigil flared, a silent pulse of pure silver light that washed over the struggling wolves. For her, it was just a bright flash. For Kale, it was a physical blow. He recoiled as if scalded, a shocked, pained snarl tearing from his throat. He stumbled back, shaking his head, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear and furious recognition. It was only a second's reprieve. But it was enough. Above them, through the broken framework of the porch, the moon finally broke free of the earth's shadow. It wasn't red yet. It was a sliver of brilliant, untarnished silver, and it fell directly upon her wolf. He threw back his head, and the sound that erupted from him was not a howl of pain, but a song of power. A long, resonant note that shook the very foundations of the house. The silvery light of the moon didn't just illuminate him, it was absorbed into him, consumed. His form began to glow from within. Kale, recovering from the sigil's pulse, saw it too. Rage and desperation contorted his features. He lunged for the kill one last time. He was too late. The light around the wolf intensified into a blinding, sun-bright corona. Alara threw her arm over her eyes. When the light faded, a man was standing where the wolf had been. He was tall and powerfully built, naked, his skin gleaming in the moonlight. The scars of his ordeal were still visible on his leg and shoulder, but they looked like ancient medals of honor, not wounds. And his eyes, they were no longer clouded with blindness. They were the color of liquid gold, bright and fierce and full of a terrifying, ancient power. They were fixed on Kale. Prince Fenris had returned. For a moment, the world stood still. The snarling of the other wolves died in their throats, replaced by whimpers of confusion and fear. The only sound was the ragged, furious breathing of Kale, still in his monstrous wolf form, staring at the man who had materialized from the light. Fenris did not look at Alara. His entire being was focused on the beast before him, his golden eyes burning with a cold fire. He didn't need to shift. The power radiating from him in that moment was a physical force, pressing down on the clearing. "Kale," Fenris said, his voice deep and resonant. The voice from Alara's dream given glorious, terrible life. It was a voice used to command, to judge. "You always were a coward. Attacking when you believed I was at my weakest." Kale let out a guttural snarl, but it was laced with uncertainty. He took a hesitant step back. The other wolves, his pack, mirrored the movement, their tails tucked, their heads low. Their alpha's fear was a contagion. "You are the weakness." Kale's voice was a distorted, half-human growl. "A blind king is no king. I was cleansing our line of your shame. My blindness was not a weakness," Fenris countered, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "It was a lesson in humility, in trust." His head turned, just a fraction, and for the first time, his golden eyes met Alara's. The connection was a physical jolt. In his gaze, she saw everything. The weeks of pain, the sound of her voice in the darkness, the memory of her gentle hands, the taste of the meat she offered when he was too proud to eat, the trust when she cut the foreign object from his flesh. It was all there, a lifetime of gratitude, and something deeper, far more profound, burning in those molten gold depths. Then his gaze snapped back to Kale, and the warmth vanished, replaced by glacial fury. "You sought to exploit what you saw as a flaw. But you only proved your own. You have no honor." With a roar of pure, enraged pride, Kyle launched himself forward. It was a desperate, final gamble. Fenris moved. It wasn't the clumsy, powerful charge of a wolf. It was the fluid, devastatingly precise strike of a warrior. He sidestepped the lunging beast as if it were moving in slow motion. His hand, now a human hand, shot out, not with a fist, but with fingers curled like a talon. He didn't aim for the body. He aimed for the neck. There was a sickening crunch. Kale's momentum carried him forward, but his snarl was cut off into a choked gurgle. He collapsed at Fenris's feet, his body convulsing, already shifting back into his human form. He lay on the ground, gasping, his hands clutching his ruined throat, his eyes wide with the shock of his own death. Fenris stood over him, his chest heaving, his expression unreadable. "The stain is cleansed," he said, his voice flat and final. He looked at the other wolves, who were now cowering, pressing themselves into the earth. He didn't speak to them. He simply looked. One by one, they lowered their heads, baring their throats in a universal sign of submission. The challenge was over. The king had reclaimed his throne. Only then did Fenris turn fully to face Alara. The raw power, the terrifying lethality, seemed to drain from him. The golden eyes that had just delivered death now held only a staggering, vulnerable awe. He took a step toward her, then another, his movements hesitant, almost reverent. He stopped a few feet from her, and slowly, he went down on one knee. He bowed his head. Alara stood frozen, the still warm sigil clutched in her hand, her mind unable to process the shift from brutal violence to this obeisance. "Look at me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She did. She couldn't look away. "All this time," he said, his golden eyes glistening. "In the darkness, it was your voice that guided me. It was your touch that healed more than my body. You saw a beast, and you gave it your kindness, your courage, your heart." He lifted his gaze to hers, and the intensity there stole her breath. "You did not heal a wolf, Alara. You saved a king, you sheltered a prince, and you awakened a man." He reached out, his fingers hovering just beside her cheek, not quite touching her. "I remember every moment, every word, every tear you shed for me when you thought I slept. My soul knew yours long before my eyes could see you." He took a deep, shuddering breath, and the words that came next were a vow, spoken with the weight of an oath. "You are my fated mate, my other half, the bond I have waited centuries to find." The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. The dead enemy, the cowed wolves, the shattered clinic, it all faded into a distant blur. All that existed was the truth in his eyes and the echo of his words in her soul. "You are my strength," he continued, his voice softening. "And in doing so, you have become my only weakness. Kale's pack is broken, but his allies remain. My world is one of politics and danger. It is not a safe place." He finally bridged the gap, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was electric, a promise and a question. But it is my home, and I want it to be yours. He held out his hand to her, palm up. An invitation, a plea. Come with me, not as my savior, but as my equal, as my queen. Rule by my side. Alara looked at his hand. She looked at the wreckage of her old life, the quiet, lonely existence of healing small creatures, of reading journals alone at night. She looked at the man kneeling before her, a prince, a warrior, the wolf who had trusted her with his life. She thought of the sigil, still warm in her hand. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a key. It had unlocked him, and it had unlocked a part of her she never knew existed, a part that was brave, that was fierce, that was capable of standing beside a king. A slow, confident smile touched her lips. It felt like the first real smile of her life. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and sure. As he rose, pulling her gently to her feet, the remaining wolves in the trees began to howl. But it wasn't a howl of attack, or of mourning. It was a song of allegiance, a fierce, beautiful chorus that welcomed their king and the human who held his heart. The storm was over. A new dawn was breaking. And their story was just beginning. The howls of the pack did not fade. They transformed. They became a resonant, humming chant that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the world around Alara. Still holding Fenris's hand, her fingers tight around his, she watched as the air in front of them began to shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt. The trees, the wreckage of her clinic, the body of Kale, it all wavered, losing substance. Steady, Fenris murmured, his voice a bedrock of calm against the tidal wave of her disorientation. His thumb stroked the back of her hand. A small, grounding gesture. The veil is thin here. My home lies just on the other side. The shimmering intensified, coalescing into a towering oval portal. Through it, Alara saw not more forest, but a vast, moonlit courtyard paved with iridescent stone that gleamed with a soft, internal light. Beyond it stood a palace that defied logic, its spires looking as if they were carved from solidified starlight and woven strands of living wood. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, pulled by the gravity of Fenris's presence and the impossible sight before her. As they crossed the threshold, the sensation was like passing through a curtain of cool, silken water. There was a moment of profound silence, a vacuum of sound, and then the world rushed back in. The air was different. It was cleaner, sharper, and carried the scent of night-blooming flowers and ancient stone. The chanting had stopped. They stood in the center of the courtyard, and surrounding them in a wide, silent circle were dozens of shifters, some in their powerful wolf forms, others in human form, all clad in elegant, armored leathers. Their faces were a mixture of shock, reverence, and open hostility. A tall, severe-looking woman with silver streaks in her dark hair and Fenris's golden eyes stepped forward. Her gaze swept over him, a flicker of relief in their depths, before landing on Alara with the force of a physical blow. The disdain was palpable. "My prince," the woman said, her voice like the crack of ice. "The pack felt your return. We had feared the worst." Her eyes cut back to Alara. "You bring a human into the heart of the Lunan kingdom?" Fenris's posture shifted. The man who had knelt before Alara was gone, replaced by the unyielding prince. He released her hand, but only to place his own on the small of her back, a gesture of possession and support that was unmistakable to every watching eye. "Astrid," he said, his tone leaving no room for question. "This is Dr. Alara Vance. She is the reason I am standing here. She is the reason I can see the suspicion on your face. She pulled the traitor's sigil from my flesh and guarded my body when I was at my most vulnerable." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. "She is my fated mate." A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the courtyard. Whispers broke out, frantic and disbelieving. "A human? Fated? Is the prince still unwell?" Astrid's face tightened. "Fated mate is a sacred bond, my prince. Forged over centuries, not weeks in the human wilds. The court will require more than your word. They will see it as a political ploy, a weakness." Alara felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with a sudden, fierce anger. She had fought for him. She had faced down a monster for him. She would not be dismissed as a weakness. Before Fenris could respond, Alara took a half step forward, her chin lifting. Her voice, though not as loud as theirs, cut through the murmurs with a clean, sharp clarity. "The political ploy was the steel trap that shattered his leg," she said, her gaze locked on Astrid. "The weakness was in the assassin who needed a blind king to feel powerful." She gestured to the palace around them, a world she still didn't understand. "I don't know your laws or your customs, but I know the sound of a loyal heart. I know the scent of infection, and I know the look of a healing wound. I know that your prince, my mate, survived because of my care. If your court questions that, then they are welcome to review my medical notes." A stunned silence fell. Fenris looked down at her, his golden eyes blazing with a mixture of shock and overwhelming pride. A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. Astrid was speechless, her composure finally cracked. It was in that silence that a new sound emerged, a soft, pained whimper from the edge of the crowd. The circle of shifters parted, and a young female, barely more than a girl, cradling a wolf pup in her arms, rushed forward. The pup's leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and it cried out with every jostle. "Please," the girl begged, her eyes wide with terror, looking not at Fenris, but at Alara. "They said you are a healer, a human healer. Our healers. Their magic is for warriors, for battle wounds. They don't know how to fix something so small. Can you help him?" Every eye in the courtyard was on Alara. This was a test far more potent than any challenge from Astrid. This was a test of her essence. Fenris made to speak, to perhaps shield her, but Alara was already moving. She knelt, her movements slow and non-threatening, all her focus on the injured animal. "May I?" she asked the girl softly. The girl, tears streaking her face, nodded. Alara's hands, which had once trembled over a blind wolf, were now perfectly steady. She gently probed the pup's leg, her touch feather-light. She murmured soothing words, the same ones she had used on Fenris. "It's all right, little one. Just a little hurt. We can fix this." She looked up at Fenris. "I need something straight and rigid. A splint, and some cloth for bandages." Fenris didn't hesitate. He barked an order, and within moments, a slender piece of polished wood and strips of soft leather were brought to her. The court watched, utterly captivated, as the human woman worked. With efficient, gentle motions, she set the tiny bone, secured the splint, and wrapped the leg. The pup's cries quieted to soft whimpers, then ceased altogether, nuzzling into her hand. When she was done, she looked up at the girl and smiled. "Keep him rested. He'll be running again before you know it." The girl gathered the now calm pup, looking at Alara with a devotion that was brighter than any torch in the courtyard. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she bowed. Not to Fenris, to Alara. The simple, profound act echoed through the silent crowd. The hostility began to dissolve, replaced by a dawning, curious respect. They had seen a queen declare her status with words. Now they had seen a healer prove her worth with her hands. Fenris offered his hand to Alara and helped her to her feet. His gaze swept over his people, his expression triumphant. "Let it be known," he declared, his voice ringing against the star-pierced spires. "My mate needs no political title to command respect. Her compassion is her crown, and any who challenge her," he added, his eyes finding Astrid's once more, "will answer to me." This time, there were no muttered doubts. This time, the silence was one of acceptance. As Fenris led her toward the great arched entrance of the palace, Alara looked not at the intimidating structure, but at the faces of the people they passed. She saw awe, curiosity, and now, the first seeds of hope. Her new life was a battlefield of a different kind, but as she walked beside her king, her hand firmly in his, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, she was not just his mate, she was their healer, and she was ready to fight. The silence of the royal chambers was a living thing, thick and watchful. The door, an immense slab of moon-veined oak, had closed behind them, muting the world to the whisper of a distant waterfall and the crackle of the hearth. Alara stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. The adrenaline that had carried her through the portal, the confrontation, and the healing had finally receded, leaving her feeling hollow and strangely cold. Fenris moved to the fireplace, his nakedness now covered by a dark, embroidered robe someone had silently provided. The shift in his demeanor was as stark as the transition from wilderness to palace. The unyielding prince was gone, replaced by a man who looked weary. The golden eyes that had burned with regal fire now held shadows as he stared into the flames. "Astrid," he said, the name a soft sigh. "She is my father's sister, the leader of the traditionalist faction." She would have preferred I returned alone, or not at all, so her own son could press his claim. He finally turned to look at Ilara, his gaze aching in its intensity. I am sorry your first moments here were a political skirmish. Ilara managed a small, shaky smile. It's a little different from a rabies scare. She took a step toward him, then hesitated. Are you fully healed? Your leg? Your eyes? He held out his hand, and she crossed the room to take it. His skin was warm, his grip firm and real. The eclipse completed what you started, he said, his thumb stroking her knuckles. The magic of my kind is tied to the moon. The blood moon is a time of immense power, of renewal. Your care brought me to the brink. The moon's light pushed me over it. He lifted his other hand and gently traced the line of her jaw. And my eyes, they see more now than they ever did before. The intimacy of the touch, the depth of feeling in his words, was overwhelming. This was the man whose fur she had brushed, whose wounds she had cleaned. This was the prince who had knelt in the dirt and pledged his life to her. The duality was dizzying. It's a lot, she whispered, her composure finally cracking. All of it. The palace, the court, Astrid, fated mates. She looked down at their joined hands. How can you be so sure? About me? About us? Fenris was silent for a long moment. Then, he led her to a low couch near the fire. Close your eyes, he murmured. When she did, he began to speak, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. The first thing I remember is the cold of the metal. The pain was a fire, but the trap was ice. Then, nothing. A void. A silence so complete I thought it was death. His fingers tightened around hers. And then I heard you. Your voice was the first thing to pierce the darkness. You were arguing with the ranger. Your voice was fierce. It had edges. I latched onto it. Ilara's breath hitched. She remembered that day. The driving rain, her own terror. Then came your scent, he continued. Clean. Like herbs and soap and the forest after the rain. It cut through the stench of my own blood and fear. When you gave me the sedative, your hand was on my neck. It was the first gentle touch I had felt in a very long time. I knew then I would not fight you. He described it all. The sound of her reading aloud from her veterinary journals, the dry, clinical text becoming a lifeline, the taste of the venison she offered when his pride had withered, the day she sat with him for an hour, her quiet presence a bulwark against his despair. The day you found the sigil, he said, his voice dropping. Your fingers, they were so careful. When you touched it, it was like you touched my very soul. The pain was not from the wound. It was the shame of my failure, made physical. And you took it from me. You pulled the shame from my body and held it in your hand. And you were not afraid. He fell silent. Ilara opened her eyes. Tears she hadn't known she was crying traced hot paths down her cheeks. That is how I know, Ilara, he whispered, his golden eyes glistening. My soul recognized its other half not in a grand ceremony, but in the quiet moments of your kindness. In the dark, you were my only light. That is a bond no courtier can understand, and no tradition can break. He leaned forward, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. He pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of profound connection. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the shared warmth of their breath, to the echo of his truth in her heart. The court will test you, he murmured. Astrid will scheme. There are customs to learn, politics to navigate, but you will not face it alone. You are not just a human in a world of shifters. You are the woman who saved a king, and you carry my heart. For the first time since stepping through the portal, the tight knot of anxiety in Ilara's chest began to loosen. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, fraught with danger, but his words were a map. His faith was a compass. She was not just a mate found. She was a healer, a warrior, a queen in the making. And as she sat in the quiet of the chamber, her forehead resting against his, she knew the most terrifying battle was over. The battle for his trust, and for her own place at his side, had already been won in a small clinic, in the dark. The dawn in the Lunan kingdom was not a gentle creeping of light, but a sudden, silver proclamation. Ilara woke to find the room awash in a cool, radiant glow, the moonstone walls themselves seeming to store and emit moonlight. Fenris was already gone, the space beside her in the massive bed still warm. A pang of something like loneliness touched her, but it was quickly chased away by the sight laid out at the foot of the bed. A gown. Not the practical, sturdy fabric of her old life, but a cascade of liquid silver and deep charcoal gray, the colors of a wolf's pelt at midnight. It was simple in cut, but the material was impossibly soft and seemed to shift in the light. Next to it lay a pair of soft-soled leather boots. It was a uniform, an invitation. She had just finished dressing, the fabric settling against her skin like a second, more confident self, when a soft knock came at the door. It was not Fenris. A young shifter male, his eyes downcast, stood in the hallway. "My lady," he said, his voice respectful but tense. "The Alpha Prime requests your presence in the Hall of Echoes." The Alpha Prime, Fenris. The title was a stark reminder of the structure she now inhabited. She nodded, her throat tight. "Lead the way." The Hall of Echoes was not a throne room. It was a vast, circular chamber deep within the palace, its walls rough, unadorned stone. In the center stood a massive, flat-topped rock, its surface worn smooth by time, and she sensed, by countless paws. Fenris stood there, not on a throne, but on the stone itself. He was dressed in simple, dark leathers, and around him, in a loose circle, stood 24 shifter warriors, Astrid among them. Their expressions were unreadable. Fenris's gaze found hers as she entered, a flicker of warmth in the gold before it was banked into regal neutrality. "Elara, join me." The circle parted for her. Every step she took felt measured, judged. She climbed the low steps to the central stone and stood beside him, her shoulder nearly brushing his arm. The energy in the room was taut, predatory. "Today," Fenris announced, his voice echoing off the stone, "we begin the first lesson, the lesson of trust." His eyes swept the circle. "A pack is not built on strength alone. It is built on the certainty that the wolf at your back will guard your flank as fiercely as you guard his. Elara is my fated mate, but a title does not earn a pack's trust. Action does." He turned to her fully now. "The bond between a shifter and their mate is more than emotion. It is a tether, a shared strength. I can lend you my speed, my senses, but you must open yourself to it. You must trust me enough to let my instincts flow through you." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you need me to do?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He gestured to the far wall of the chamber, where a series of narrow, dark openings yawned like missing teeth in the stone. "The maze of the ancestors. It is a test for our young. They must navigate it blind, using only their pack sense. You will enter. I will guide you." A cold dread washed over her. It was a cave system, dark, enclosed, unknown. She was a creature of open spaces and sterile light. Astrid spoke, her voice dripping with false concern. "It is a dangerous game, my prince. A human's mind is fragile. To impose our senses upon her could break her." "It is not your concern, Aunt," Fenris said, his tone final. His eyes never left Elara's. "Do you trust me?" She looked at the dark openings, then back at the man who had trusted her with his life when he was at his most vulnerable. She remembered the feel of his fur under her hands, the sound of his heartbeat slowing under her care. "Yes," she said, and the word was a vow. He nodded. "Then close your eyes." She did, plunging herself into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own panicked breathing and the cold stone beneath her feet. Then, it came. It was not a sound or a sight. It was a presence, a warmth that started in the center of her chest and spread outwards, like ink blooming in water. Suddenly, she was aware of him, not just beside her, but within her. She could feel the solid, unwavering rock of his focus. And then, other sensations began to bleed through. The world gained a new dimension. She could smell the damp stone, the musky scent of the shifters around her, the faint, ozone tang of Astrid's displeasure. She could hear the scuff of a boot on stone 20 feet away, the drip of water deep within the maze. "Breathe." His voice sounded not in her ears, but in her mind. It was calm, steady. "I am with you. Now. Walk." Her first steps were hesitant, shuffling, but with each one, the connection solidified. It was like learning to see with a new set of eyes. She could feel the space around her, the press of the walls, the open path ahead. She moved deeper into the maze, the darkness absolute behind her eyelids. Yet the path was clear in her mind, a map drawn not in light, but in scent and sound and the unwavering tether to the man at the center of the stone. Then, a new scent. Sharp, coppery, foreign. A low growl rumbled, not in the maze, but in Fenris's chest, and she felt the vibration as her own. A threat. "Stop." His command was instant. She froze. A heartbeat later, A massive, furred body lunged from a side passage, its jaws snapping shut on the empty air where she would have been. It was a test, a brutal, real one. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. The connection wavered. The mental map began to blur. No! His voice was a whip crack in her mind. Do not let go. My eyes are your eyes. My strength is yours. Feel it. She clung to the tether, to the warmth in her chest. She forced her breathing to slow, matching the rhythm of his. The world snapped back into focus, sharper than before. She could feel the aggressive intent of the wolf in the passage, could sense its hesitation. Now, Fenris guided. To your left. 3 steps. There is a narrow ledge. Climb. She moved without question, her hands finding the holds he described in her mind. She pulled herself up, the muscles in her arms burning. The wolf below snarled in frustration. Step by step, guided by the bond, she navigated the rest of the maze. When she finally stepped out of the far opening and into the light, blinking, she was trembling, covered in a fine sheen of sweat, but her heart was pounding with a wild, fierce exhilaration. She turned to look back at the Hall of Echoes. Fenris was watching her, and the pride in his golden eyes was a brighter light than any sun. The circle of warriors was silent, but the hostility was gone, replaced by a new, measuring respect. They had not seen a fragile human. They had seen a woman who had faced the dark and walked through it, guided by the will of their king. Astrid's face was a mask of stone. Ilara walked back to the center of the hall, her legs steady. She stopped before Fenris. I see you, she said softly, the words meant for him alone. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm. And I, he said, his voice thick with emotion, have never been more seen. The first lesson was over. She had passed. The respect Ilara had earned in the Hall of Echoes was a fragile shield. It did not stop the stares in the corridors, the whispers that hushed as she passed, or the subtle ways the court reminded her she was an outsider. The gown she wore felt less like a uniform and more like a costume. She was playing a part, but the stage was alien, and the other actors knew she didn't know her lines. 3 days after the maze, Fenris was pulled away to settle a border dispute on the far edge of his territory. His absence was a physical chill. The palace, once awe-inspiring, now felt vast and empty, its moonlit silences accusing. It was then that Astrid found her. Ilara was in the royal gardens, a place of bizarre, bioluminescent flora and trees with silver-barked leaves, trying to find a moment of peace. The air smelled of starlight and damp earth. The humans seek solace among growing things. Astrid's voice cut through the quiet. She emerged from behind a tree that pulsed with a soft blue light, a predictable sentiment. Ilara straightened, her guard slamming into place. What do you want, Astrid? To offer you a truth my nephew is too blinded by. Gratitude to see. Astrid stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. You believe you are building a life here. A romance. You are not. You are a delay. A complication. She gestured to the palace around them. The Lunan kingdom is at a precipice. Our alliances with the other shifter clans are fraying. They see a king who disappeared, who returned with a human fated mate, a story they view as a pathetic lie, and they see weakness. They are like jackals, waiting for the first sign of limping prey. Ilara said nothing, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. Fenris is a great warrior, Astrid continued, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. But a king must be more. He must be a symbol of unassailable strength, of pure blood. Your presence here mocks that. Every day you remain, you undermine his authority. You make war more likely. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. The best thing you can do for him, the only truly selfless act you can perform, is to leave. Go back to your world of bandages and broken-winged sparrows. Let him take a mate of proper lineage. Let him secure his throne with a union that means something. Let him be the king he was born to be, not the man you have made him. The words were expertly chosen, each one a needle seeking a vein of doubt. They found their mark. Ilara remembered the hostile faces in the courtyard, the calculating looks in the Hall of Echoes. She thought of Fenris, burdened with the weight of a kingdom, and wondered if her love was indeed an anchor dragging him down. A wave of crushing certainty washed over her. Astrid was right. This was not her world. She was a disruption, a weakness. Without a word, Ilara turned and walked away, Astrid's satisfied silence a victory at her back. She moved through the palace like a ghost, back to the royal chambers. Her hands trembled as she stripped off the silver-gray gown, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She pulled on her old jeans and sweater, the familiar, coarse fabric a comfort. They smelled of her clinic, of pine and antiseptic, of home. She would not say goodbye. A clean break was the kindest. She would use the portal he had shown her, the one that led to the woods near her old home. She would disappear, and he could tell his court whatever story he needed to. Tears blurred her vision as she slipped out of the chamber and into the labyrinthine halls. She followed the descending passages, the air growing cooler, until she reached the lower levels. The portal chamber was a small, dark cave deep in the bedrock, a single, shimmering tear in reality hanging in the center, showing a familiar glimpse of Earth's night sky. This was it, the end of the fairy tale. She took a step toward the light. Stop. The command was not spoken aloud. It was a roar in her soul, a seismic shock through the bond she had tried to ignore. It was filled with such raw, panicked agony that her knees nearly buckled. She froze, her back to the chamber entrance. She could feel him then, not as a gentle presence, but as a storm. Rage, fear, and a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. The connection she had forged in the maze, which had lain dormant, was now a screaming, live wire. Slowly, she turned. Fenris stood in the doorway, his chest heaving. He wasn't in his royal leathers. He was in traveling clothes, dust-covered and damp, as if he'd run for miles without stopping. His golden eyes were wild, the pupils slitted. "You were leaving." His voice was a ragged tear in the silence. It wasn't a question. Alara hugged herself, the tears finally falling. Astrid said, "I don't care what Astrid said." The words exploded from him, echoing in the small chamber. He took a furious step forward. "Do you think my throne is so fragile that it can be toppled by the love of a good woman? Do you think my strength is so meager that it needs to be propped up by political marriages?" He was in front of her now, his hands gripping her arms, not to hurt her, but as if he were afraid she would vanish into mist. "Astrid speaks of strength as if it is only claws and teeth," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "She is a fool. The strongest thing I have ever felt is the bond I have with you. It is the reason I can lead, because I am no longer leading alone. You are not my weakness, Alara. You are the foundation upon which I am building my entire reign." He shook his head, his expression shifting from fury to a desperate, aching need. "When I felt you pulling away, when I felt you heading for this portal, it was like feeling my own soul being ripped from my body. That is the truth. Not Astrid's poison." He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "The crown is just metal and stone. It is heavy, and it is cold. You are what gives it meaning. You are my warmth, my light. Do not leave me to rule in the dark again." The last of her resistance shattered. His words didn't just comfort her. They rebuilt her. He wasn't asking her to stay for his sake. He was begging her to stay for theirs. "I'm sorry," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. "I'm so sorry." He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "Never again," he murmured into her skin. "You do not get to sacrifice yourself for my sake. We face the jackals together, or not at all." As they stood entwined in the dark, the shimmering portal forgotten, Alara understood. This was the final lesson, the one that superseded all others. Her place was not behind him or in front of him. It was at his side. And she would never doubt it again.